Of course.
Okay.
Okay, welcome to the Claremont branch again. My name is Glenn Ingersoll, and after the reading, we'll have a little interview with Maw, and then also opportunity for anybody who wants to ask questions If you feel like my interview was missing some important thing, I'm happy to have Maw here, Maw Shein Win. Her writing has appeared in various journals, including Cimarron Review, Ping Pong, and Vitriol. She has a poetry chapbook, Ruins of a Glittering Palace. She's one of the poetry editors for the literary zine Rivet, and was an artist in residence at the Headland Center for the Arts. Along with composer Amanda Chaudhry, Win is part of musical duo Pitta of the Mind, which combines poetry with abstract electronic music. She also teaches at the San Francisco Writers Grotto. Please welcome Maw Shein Win.
I am really touched that you all are here, and thank you for coming. And thank you, Glenn, for organizing this. And it's really exciting that the series is starting, and I'm just touched to be the first poet. So I do feel comfortable in libraries. I worked at one, quite a few actually, in Southern California before I moved up here. And I wrote poems about working in a library, and I thought, how appropriate that I begin with this one. The indexing of sensation. It will be 4 days until the air lifts to the vaulted ceiling. A woman in a blue shawl comes into the library and passes lilies into my hands. Put these in water, honey, and remember to rest. I push the cart down the carpeted aisle. The repetition of movement is a meditation. Anno's counting book, Mitsumasa Anno, PZ 7A 5875. The Forgotten Ones, Milton Rogobin, TP 820R64. The Balloon, a Bicentennial Exhibition, TL 615B34. Maps of countries that don't exist anymore, abandoned photos in shoeboxes. The archiving of fantasies, the referencing of systems, the indexing of sensation. Thank you. So this is a recent poem, and it's called Are You in the Room With Me Now? Yes. Are you in the room with me now? My therapist asked why I never cry. I asked myself the same, closing my eyes, a small sty in my vision. As hard as I tried not to cry, I was shy as a child. As I crossed the street with Mother, I hid behind her lab coat, my throat taut and tight. I thought I might cry. The other night, I lost my sight. I could hear a couple on the crosswalk, a man doing a handstand, two thieves making plans. Perhaps a chance to dance in another place. I could cross the state line, cry at the sight of a shimmering lake. My therapist asked, what are you thinking? How does that make you feel? Where did that come from? And are you in the room with me now? In Rio, there is a majestic cross on a cliff. People live in pink paper shacks below. I danced and I drank there. I thought I might die there. I crossed myself, although I didn't believe. You sweat silver tears. You think your body might be crying. You see through pink paper walls and think about things you've done in small spaces and big places now. So the past couple of years, I've been working on poems inspired by film, and a couple of these poems are in the chapbook that Glenn made. And so this first one is called Score. The film score is a Turkish bathhouse, a thankless accountant, a backcountry road in Montana, a shy teenager, a loving aunt, a wine glass with a painting of a cow on it, the underbelly of a cat, a stream running along the outside of a prison, the shadow of an organ, a heroin addict, a blanket statement, a lemon rolling down the hill, a blister on the tip of a finger, a forest ranger, a chunk of ice melting, a bully, a bowl of fresh honey, an abandoned baby, two bank robbers drinking coffee, the edge of the volcano, a loose belt, a sorrowful laugh, a broad brush stroke, 3 dice, the left side of her face and an orange coat left on a park bench, the gold light hitting the Venetian glass in a way that the heroine could only imagine. Another film poem, Short Films number 11. The auteur has run out of pain pills. Panic, a hybrid, a mystery, a biopic. Space is an oddity, some believe. Extreme close-up of bright orange peel on a wooden floor. A crow hops its way closer to the electric gate. Smokestacks on the horizon. My teeth are covered with guilt and sometimes beauty. So, while I was at the Headlands, I worked on a broadside project, and also the first day that I was there, I crashed a wedding. So this is the poem that I wrote, The Wedding Party. The guests arrive in 2s and 4s, emerge from their wagons and Mini Coopers, shawl-clad and necktied. Like mountain goats, they descend the dry, grassy hillside, teetering upon the rocks below. The bridesmaids tight in satin dresses, sweating lightly, the cousins and uncles quaffing the Merlot. Flutes of champagne and roasted garlic rounds fly off the trays, and the bluegrass band is blazing. 2 old friends from college make their way to the dance floor. The long red dress swirls around their legs as they arch back. The wife of the man on the floor leans forward, her eyes glazy and spent. His parents really wanted her, you know, she whispers, not me. Her feet hurt in those heels. They make her want to smoke. The children sit on wood benches along the wall, cutting out paper flames, scattering them on the floor. The wedding guests spin on their heels, splashing the Merlot on neckties and shawls, whispering bitter things, such bitter things, as the children stomp on the flames until their feet hurt. Well, you're all my friends, so you know this already about me, but I collaborate a lot with visual artists and musicians, and recently a dancer, which is really exciting, Sharon Coleman. And who's also a poet, of course. And this is a poem in my book, Winds of the Glittering Palace, which has paintings by Mark Fletcher. And this is also in the booklet. Stipulations. A sentence she thought she would never say. I am shopping for attorneys. The act of separation, the schedule of assets and debts, the declaration of disclosures, the accounts receivable and unsecured notes, the petitioner and respondent, the partnerships and other interests, the deferred compensation. The itemized as follows: the stick bugs, the dried paint, the overgrown teeth, the silver linen, the milk trip, the bamboo shoes, the animal's feet, the wilted oars, and the falling from one mattress to another. Thank you. So, Tom wanted me to read this poem, so I'm going to read this poem. It's called Objects. A blue glass bowl of miniature oranges, 3 inches from arm's reach. I objects in terms of distance now, reachable, yet not. This morning I drop a plastic tub of butter on the kitchen floor. I try to reach it with my grabber, a temporary extension of my arm. The lid slides off. The butter tips and my cat starts to lick. The objects in my life with more significance: wheelchair over umbrella, walker over work shoes, bed tray over sunglasses. I measure distance from hand to knee to shin to heel. I think of Burma miles away, the grocery store miles away. My father's voice crackles through the phone miles and miles away. You were born in Burma, and then you're my niece, right? Objects found and lost, my ex-husband's brown sandals, loose feathers from a bird that my cat killed, a large smooth seed given to me by the owner of a flower shop in Tokyo. I look down at the floor, trying to remember. And so last Sunday was the one-year anniversary of my father's passing in Joshua Tree. And this poem is called Lost Horse Valley. The horse is lost and the valley is long. Needles from a Joshua tree, cholo and ocotillo, quail, cadet gray, moonlit, wire lettuce, antlion wings. He passes into the valley. Left behind, 3 containers of Quaker oats, bitter black tea in a cup, empty suitcases tied together with twine, a dusty army cap on the kitchen counter. The youngest daughter clips his toenails as a monitor slows. Another daughter flies over the valley. And this poem is called The Missing. 1. A river of damp green runs through the burnt orange valley. The swimmers in the diamond-shaped lake at night. The trees bust open, petals landing on cotton dresses. The children have disappeared. Parents weep in empty homes. 2. A chalkboard, a basket of fresh berries, lost signals. The opera singer brings tears to their eyes. The swimmers near the lake, shivering. A painting in the studio, glittering. 3. The television doesn't work anymore, nor does the oven. The deer have gone the wrong direction. Turn around and head for the hills. The painter tracks greenhouse paint on the blank canvas. The girls go to school to learn. Their packed lunches and satchels. 4. Mother cuts the melon into sections and puts them on chipped plates. She calls out, "The fruit is ready. Come home now." Streaks of teal and vermilion, layers upon layers. The deer can't find their way back to the hills. My second to last poem.
Wow.
Too short? Okay. I do have another one. Sorry. Okay. I have another one just in case, but I thought I timed it well. Okay, so I can read another one. Okay, so this is a poem from my very first chapbook, many years ago, called Tales of a Lonely Meat Eater, and it's called Revolution. At the click of the lock, we knew we were all alone. The French doll, the Indian doll, the jumping jack, and the Dutch doll who says mama. With little mistress asleep in her bed, the room began to buzz with our dolly energy. I hollered out of my ragamuffin mouth, "Revolution, unite against oppressors." The Indian doll stood up. We are all citizens of the world. Secretly I knew, in my grandma-made heart, that our nightly protests and gatherings would someday crush little mistress. After all, It was she who rescued me from the roach-infested pit called Grandma's attic, sewed me a left button eye, and fed me make-believe food to renew my strength. Yet it was the Indian doll who pointed out that Mistress was playing the French doll against a jumping jack, hoarding the frosted tea cakes all for herself, increasing the number of toy soldiers daily, and was, overall, a 7-year-old dictator. So I guess I'm trying to read this poem. Okay, so one thing that I've been doing with friends, this poem in particular was with MK and Tim. It's not here, but so we're taking turns choosing a word, and every month we write a poem, and we have to use that word. And so, yeah, patrol was the word. So this poem is called Patrol, and just very new. And if you have any comments to make it better, please let me know. Okay, Patrol. He carefully ladles the ragu into the blue bowl. Bits of beef, slivers of pearl onion, mushroom, a warm loaf of bread. The guard patrols at the border, sipping from a flask, shivering. He remembers that winter, the wisteria asleep, that violet hanging, the warm body there, the lattice, the lantern, swinging, swinging. The tiny blooms, despite the drought, clamber towards light, a wink at destruction. So in honor of, today's the Beat Museum poetry reading.
Today and tomorrow.
Today and tomorrow, so I was thinking about Allen Ginsberg, and I haven't read this poem in a while, and it's for Hugh! And my cat Bokchoy, and Allen Ginsberg.
All right.
Yowl. I saw the best cats of my generation, deranged by hunger, stalking, maniacal, furry, prowling the alleyways and cul-de-sacs of Oakland, hunting for that abandoned bowl of kibbles. Feral feline, stoned on catnip, drunk on dirty rainwater, loveless lurking loners, slinking through the dusky dawn, who arch their mangy backs, yowling under street lamps, hissing, growling, leaping, mongrels and mudcats in heat. O Felis sylvestris catus, O Animalia cordata carnivora, O predator of hummingbirds. Reclusive panthers, mystical and alert, shedding wisdom and cat hairs, fierce gods and goddesses of the other world, who collarless and aloof pissed on the corners of San Francisco, hallucinating sparrows falling from the sky. Sand cats, smoke cats, snap cats, contemplating pause. Now's the hard part.
Chat for you.
Okay,
One
thank
for
you.
me.
Don't ask hard questions.
Well, I'm just gonna start by just talking to you a little bit. Sounds you do enjoy performance. It's nice to see.
Yes, I do.
There are poets who struggle with performance. Did you always enjoy performance, or was this something that that you began with, or things change over the course of your?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I started writing poetry when I was very young, and I started doing readings in college and studied creative writing. And I remember being nervous even back then and talking to my friends before I read and just like, I feel really nervous, but I also felt compelled to do readings. And even though I had this nervousness, I kind of pushed through it and just continued to perform. And then I got, well, I think when I started this band with some friends, and I was a drummer, and I can't really play drums. And I think that really helped with getting used to being in front of an audience. And then I studied performance art while I was in school and did some crazy performances. And so,
Do you have any performance art stories?
Well, I did fail a performance art class. I like telling people that. But, well, okay, so Yoko Ono was a big influence of mine. And so I remember with my friend Adrian, who was just visiting in town, we would go to different parks in Long Beach and Wilmington and, you know, not really tell people we're doing performances. So I did this one performance where we had a big bag of, you know, stripped paper, computer paper, and then I went through the bag and we had it tied to a tree, and then Adrian had a little, wearing a crazy outfit and playing the kids' piano, and then he was just doing like, you know, these crazy sounds. And then I went through the bag and started breaking through, and our only audience were like 4 kids under 7 years old. And they were just like, what's wrong with those people? So I actually really enjoyed doing performances like that. It's performance art stories.
Did you document this sort of thing? No.
We didn't document back then. I can't believe I even remember.
Yeah, in reading about performance artists, a lot of it is the story that they tell about afterwards. Like maybe there almost wasn't any audience for this thing, but it sounds fascinating afterwards. And then there's the artifacts of it, like the pieces of paper,
Right.
and they're taped down and framed or something.
Well, it was really nice because, you know, Adrian was just staying with me, and he has better memories. So he just said, "Ma, do you remember when we did this and when we did that?" I'm like, "I did? Oh, okay." So
you mentioned playing drums, or at least
Percussion.
playing. Other art outlets, to visual arts. You work with musicians. But,
So Pitta of the Mind is a collaboration between my friend Amanda Chaudhary and I, and she writes music based on my poems, and we have a color theme every performance. So sometimes it's green or silver, which is my personal favorite, and she writes, you know, music. And we've done a lot of performances. We haven't recently, but we've done a lot of performances around the Bay Area, and we have a website, we have recordings up, and it's just been really a great way to perform my poetry, you know, besides doing readings, to perform with Amanda. So that's one thing I've been doing. And then just recently, Sharon, our friend, Sharon Coleman, who's an amazing poet, I was reading for Beast Crawl. Oh, you were there. I was reading for Beast Crawl, and then I asked the audience, does anyone want to do interpretive dance, which I asked once in a while. And Sharon got up and started dancing, and I couldn't really see her, but apparently she did a great job, and it inspired her because she used to dance. And she said, "Mom, I feel like I wanted to start dancing again." So she recently did a performance at the Flight Deck. And it was just lovely. And after that, they asked her to do a longer piece. So so I just sent her, and it's great because I have all this experimental writing that I can't do anything with. No one wants to publish. So I sent it all to her. I'm like, yay, you know. And so she's gonna come up with some dances to my poems. And then just recently, my friend Leanne, who lives in San Diego, she runs an art space down there, and she wanted to use my poetry to match me up with a filmmaker. And so, which is, of course, you know, one of my fantasies is to collaborate with a filmmaker. So I can't say the name yet, but there's a person that I'm collaborating with. So.
It sounds like the collaborations you've talked about so far, you already have a text. Have you generated text in collaboration with other people?
That's a good question. So 2 Well, one thing that I did at the Headlands was the Broadside project that I mentioned, and that was a smaller project. And I remember being there just thinking, oh my gosh, I'm just surrounded by amazing visual artists, and I would like to do a Broadside project. So I asked 12 artists, and then I wrote poems to all of their different pieces that they gave me. And then after that, a couple years later, I started thinking, oh, wouldn't it be great to do it on a bigger scale? And I didn't realize how big it was going to be. But I asked my friend Megan Wilson, and it ended up being, oh my gosh, a three-year project at Intersection for the Arts. He was in it, and some friends were in it. And we basically had 12 artists and 12 writers, and they were matched together. It's a little complicated, but we had playlists, and at the end of 2 years, it intersected. We had a show at Intersection for the Arts, and we did broadsides that are, how big are they? I don't know, 3 feet by 2 feet, and they're in our storage unit right now. I haven't been able to sell them. They turned out great, so if anyone wants one, please let me know. Yes.
Yeah, that's one of the fascinating things about poem. They're these little things, they're books. Right? And as opposed to many of the other kinds of visual arts, sculpture, which require storage and galleries. Is there something about that portability of the poem that that is either an advantage or disadvantage compared to the other arts?
Well, Tom, my partner, is a drummer, and so hearing him talk about moving his drum set all the time makes me very, very relieved that all I have to do is go somewhere and bring my book. So, I know for Pit of the Mind performances, I've had a lot of props and stuff like that, but on the whole, I appreciate and feel grateful that being a writer is a relatively easy thing to do as far as portability and, being able to bring your poetry anywhere.
Yeah, the entrance the hurdles for the equipment, small hurdles for the equipment,
yeah.
Paper, pencil,
or
you don't need
your smartphone.
Yeah, well, the smartphone now, if you have it anyway, everybody does.
Yeah.
They're texting away. I'm dodging people on the sidewalk now. Not seeing where they're going. You've worked as an editor, Comet, the current Rivet. Anything else? Any other projects like that?
Well, so I was still living at home, and I was hanging out with a lot of musicians, and I just remember that, and then I was also meeting writers because I was in school, and I just thought, I would love to do a poetry magazine and just ask, interesting people that I've been meeting. And our father had a Xerox machine in our living room, and he really liked to Xerox stuff. And so, as a result, I like to Xerox stuff. So I started typing up the poems on my typewriter, and then, making hundreds and hundreds of copies, and then the Xerox machine broke, and my dad got really mad. He's like, who's been using the Xerox machine? I'm like, me, Dad. My sister. And it was just, I think I knew at that point that I really loved editing and putting together, just books, and I love small books, and I love zines, and so I did maybe 4 or 5, and I published some poets who are really well known now, but they weren't back then, like Amy Gersler and David Trinidad, and Exine's first poems, and some musicians, and so that happened, I guess, starting at the age of 18, 19, and then after that, I started like, oh, it'd be really interesting to do other projects. So I did this one book called Life Stories, where I asked a lot of different writers to write their life story on one page. So I had like 25, I found that recently when I was unpacking, and so I started putting out, occasional, these are all zines, stapled together. And then when I moved to San Francisco, I was with my friend Kathleen Nunnally, I remember Kathleen, and we were going to a lot of music events and art events, and we went to a party, and I remember the next morning we woke up, because we were planning on going to the San Francisco Book Fair, and Patti Smith was going to read, and who else was going to read? Stuart Brand, and just all these different people, and some of our heroes, and that morning we woke up, and I said, wouldn't it be great if we started a magazine? She's like, that's a great idea. So that was our business plan. And so we had our tape recorder, and we went to the book fair, and we just asked, different people if we could interview them, and remarkably, they said yes. I was so shocked. I asked Brian Eno, he said he was busy. So we did Comet for about 4 or 5 years, and it was a really huge part of my life, and I really enjoyed it. It was also kind of frustrating too, but overall, I enjoyed it. And then
What were some of the frustrations of running a magazine?
Well,
not having any money.
that was the number one thing. I remember there were a lot of zines at the time, like Kitchen Sink and To-Do List, and it was a really exciting time. But I remember that I kept hearing this business plan, I was like, what is this business plan? What is this thing called business plan? And so there was, at the time, there was an organization called the Independent Publishers Association, and so Kathleen was kind of in charge of the business side of things, and she would go to some of the meetings. She's like, "Mom, we need a business plan." And I said, "Okay, what's that?" She's like, "Well, I'll figure it out." And so I guess that involved raising money, which was like, whoa, and doing advertising. And so we tried our hardest, and I think the frustrating part, because the magazine was print, was raising money to pay for it. And so Kathleen and I basically pretty much paid for all the magazines, and we made a little bit of money back. But the good thing was that it helped with our taxes. So, but the wonderful thing, what I loved, besides meeting so many different people and just it felt like a family, and was some of our fundraisers. We had big parties at local places like the Lab and Southern Exposure, and those were just incredible events of having the people that were in the magazine and musicians, and just a really fun experience.
Experience organizing and being creating events, as opposed to, which is a different skill from the quieter detail work of the producing the printed material. Most poets know magazines mainly through sending work to them. And I imagine you know other magazines that way too. You send your work out.
Mm-hmm.
How has judging other people's work for your own publications changed your work? Has it?
Well, one thing I would say, which is related to your question, is I definitely do not take rejections personally at all anymore, because I remember in the beginning, I think, I don't know, maybe I was 25, and I'm like, I'm going to send it to Isabel. And I'm going to send it to New Yorker, or whatever, I don't know what I was thinking. And then I just remember going, what? They don't want my poetry? I can't believe it. I was like,
well, you make fun, but I'm sure there was.
No, I remember just that feeling, getting your first rejection letters. It's like, so then after doing journals and just like even Comet, and this is pre-internet, of course, I could not believe how many submissions we got for our little magazine. It was just like, and not just in the Bay Area, I mean, from all over. And Kathleen and I would just be like, how are they finding out about it? Just, like, it was so baffling to us, and but we read every single submission, and, and I mean, for me, I have a really hard time rejecting people, and people actually were saying, "Ma, your rejection letter is a little over the top," you know, because I was just like, "Thank you so much," and you know, kind of over the top. But I think what I've learned from the experience of being an editor is that it is, and you know, writers, as we know this, it really is subjective. I mean, you know, the poem, I had a poem published in Cimarron Review, and it was a poem that I sent to 3 or 4 different magazines, and you know, so I just thought, oh, it's not going to get published. And then I was so surprised, you know, because that's sort of a difficult magazine to get published in, so it was a nice surprise. And I realized, like, oh, you know, it just, yeah, it's very, very subjective, and I try not to take it too personally. And actually, I haven't had much time to send work out, so if anyone wants to send their work out with me, please let me know.
Have you done that before with
Friends?
You know, a group?
Well, Heather and I are in a writing group together, and she's really good at sending out work. So I asked her, like, oh, you know, we should.
What's your secret?
What's your secret? She's super organized. So I'm gonna get on that.
Great. Well, let's step back a little bit. You've talked about your family a little bit, and then when you were 18, publishing people like David Trinidad, who I've heard of. So that sounds like you were in LA?
Yes.
So can you talk about your family and your growing up a little bit?
Yeah.
A little more.
So our parents are from Burma, and I was born in Massachusetts, and they came to the United States because they were both in medical school, and they wanted to do their residencies in the United States, and so my sister and my younger brother and I were born in the United States, and my 2 older sisters were in Burma, and the plan was for my sisters to come later after my parents got settled. Kind of a long story, but it took many years for my sisters to come to the United States, so we did not grow up with them, and we met them around, I think I was maybe 13 years old. And so, you know, I remember that feeling of waiting for our sisters was something that really affected my childhood. I have a lot of memories of thinking about something that was going to happen in the future. You know, well, one day when your sisters come, one day when your sisters come from Burma. And so I've written about that. And we moved a lot. My dad was a doctor for the VA hospital for a while, so we basically moved across the United States and lived in Colorado and lived in Nevada. I would not recommend living in Nevada, by the way. Sorry. Especially Sparks. Sorry. And then we moved to Southern California. And I went to junior high and high school and college down in Los Angeles area. And one of the reasons I moved here was because of City Lights books and thinking about the poetry scene up here. And you know, I enjoyed living in Los Angeles, but there was this part of me, I felt like, to be a poet, for some reason, I feel like I have to live in San Francisco. And some friends were like, really? But I did it and moved up here, I think in 96 or 7. Yeah.
I remember reading one time, Elizabeth Bishop said that she was embarrassed to say that she was a poet. I'm like, Elizabeth Bishop, wow. Do you have any feelings of, well, inferiority or pride that around being a poet that you could speak about?
That's a really good question, Glenn. So actually, when I think about how I identify myself, I remember that when people would say, what do you do? I would say, oh, I'm a teacher. And I remember, maybe, how many years ago was that when we had that conversation? Well, my sister and I were talking, and she said, Ma, I don't understand why you tell people that you're a teacher, and sometimes you write. When people ask me, you know, who you are, what does your sister do, I always say you're a writer. And I just remember going, yes, I am a writer. And I'm a And a writer and a poet. And I think there is, I don't know why it, I'd like to ask other poets this question, but if someone says, oh, what do you do? I don't know if I say right away that I'm a poet, but I do say I'm a writer.
Yeah, one of the tricks is I write poetry.
I write poetry,
But,
yeah, I
you
say
know,
that, I
but
write
then
poetry.
you're not owning this sort of strange persona, the poet. What is that? The beret wearer, all in black or something?
Yeah.
What is the poet?
Well,
what is
no.
it?
Yeah, like one
A
of
little
those
color.
color. Well, you know, I mean, yeah, I think, I mean, what about you? Do you feel, when people ask you? do you
Well,
say-
yeah, I say I write poetry. I will
But you
say
say-
I write poetry. I don't. I try out. I'm a writer, and there are so many kinds of writers that I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm not an artist. My dad sent me how to write, magazine articles for Fun and Profit. I'm like, no, this is not going to happen. I write for fun, but not for profit. Apparently, sounds we've talked about money a little bit. Actually paid for this little performance, which is nice. Sponsored by the Friends, the library. So, Friends groups.
Hey, yeah, all right.
Thank you.
So, art is, and poetry especially, you don't walk by and see the poem for $2,000 hanging, right?
Yeah.
What are money concerns as far as...
This is my favorite thing to say lately. Tom has heard it many, many times. When I make my first $1 million from poetry, and now it's not funny anymore because I say it all the time, but so if I do make money, which is rare, it just feels so bizarre to me. I did a reading for Litquake last year, and I remember, I don't think he told me that I was going to get paid, and I remember getting the mail, I'm like, what's this? And I opened it up, and it was a check for $50. I was like, and it was just so weird, it was just like, they gave me $50 to do a poetry reading? I can't believe it. And I was making such a big deal about it, and then I ended up losing the check. I never actually got to cash it. And now, it was a year ago, so I don't want to ask questions. Lame.
Well, we've talked quite a bit. Let's open it up and see if there are people who would like to ask questions.
There are two different poems. You had a reference to two thieves making plans in one poem, two bank robbers having a cup of coffee in another poem. So beyond, maybe address like, what is there an obvious connection there that maybe the rest of us don't get, or do you just really want to take Tom on a crime story?
I have a friend named Joe Loya. I don't know if some of you know him, but he was a bank robber, and I can't remember how many years he was in prison. 8 years? Yeah, and while he was in prison, he wrote the book, and it really changed. As you can imagine, prison changed his life. And some of the stories, it's not like he's talked to me that much about it, but some of the stories he told me about, being in solitary confinement and just how prison changed his life. It's not like there's specific references to Joe per se, but I think somehow it just kind of came in the back of my mind poetically and worked its way. And you know what? It's funny you asked that, Paul, because when I did a little practice reading right before I came here, I'm like, oh my gosh, I have bank robbers twice. Yeah.
Hi, Ma. I know you like to talk about your collaborations, but I think you forgot to talk about Glittering House and your collaboration with the painter.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so, well, I mentioned my friend Adrian, and my other best friend is Mark Dutcher, who is a visual artist. He lives in Los Angeles, and we've collaborated on different things. He was also a fellow percussionist for Pearls Before Swine, and he's an amazing painter. And I wrote this book after my partner moved out, and it, a lot of these poems deal with that. And, Mark said, I'd like to do a book with you. And so he did a series of paintings, and, then we were just like, well, where are we going to publish it? And he met these publishers, and they read the poems and loved his work. So it was a relatively easy process. I mean, and usually it's not,
Right.
So I felt really fortunate that, this book was published. But yeah, there is something about and just the nature of collaboration that it just feels very second nature to me. It feels, Anyone want to collaborate with me?
Okay, that's a challenge. And we have anyone else?
I'll ask you something though. I haven't asked you in a few years, and maybe you'll have a different answer, or maybe I can hear it differently now, which is, why do you like experimental poetry, and what do you think experimental poetry is?
Oh, Lori.
Is that a hard question? That's gonna be easy.
That'll take all of, no. Well, okay, so, I mean, there are, many different branches of experimental poetry, and I don't even know if I don't think I would call myself, I mean, I know I said I wrote some experimental poems, and I know some of my stuff, some of my poetry could be called, experimental, but I think that's such a broad term, and, but I know that for me, a lot of my influences have been, I just remember being in college and the first time reading Gertrude Stein, and I remember my fellow classmates just going, I can't read this. This is horrible. And I just was like, oh my God, being 18 or 19 years old and just, wow, this speaks to me. And I just started, reading as much as I could. And I think that, and then, getting into Yoko Ono's music, just felt really inspired by that period of time and just exploring different artists' works. And I think that had an effect on my writing over the years. Does that answer your question?
What was it about them that you think spoke to you?
I think it was kind of the pushing of boundaries, because I remember in a lot of my creative writing classes and literature classes, we read a lot of narrative poetry, and I remember a lot of our instructors loved Charles Bukowski, and not that I don't like Charles Bukowski, but I just remember thinking, oh God, I have to read Charles Bukowski again? Yeah, it was just really weird, and so Southern California. So
up here too.
Up here too. And so I felt, my friends and I kind of had to just do a little research on our own to, find out other writers and artists and musicians that were not necessarily doing the type of work that I was having to read in school. And I remember, like literature classes, reading just, John Updike and John Cheever, and I love John Cheever's short stories, but it was just kind of like a lot of, similar work. So, so I think, writers that had different ways of exploring narrative and form just appealed to me. And,
just to follow up just a little on that, you were writing poetry before you went to college.
Yes.
And you talk about discovering Gertrude Stein in college. Sort of work were you producing before?
Oh, God, that I will not read to you. So, we just went through a major move, and I have saved everything, including all my notebooks from high school. And so I found all my really bad poetry. So, just...
Do you recognize that person still?
Actually, I did. I found, lots of love poems that I've written and just heartbreak, lots of heartbreak poems. Like, 17, like how much heartbreak can I have? Really
A
melodramatic.
far larger proportion of your life was spent heartbroken when you were 17.
That's true. But hopefully my poetry has changed since then.
Do you have a working definition for yourself? Do you find it useful to have a working definition of the word poetry?
That is a good question. A working definition. You know, Paul, I mean, Glenn, I think I'm going to have to think about that one. Does anyone else have a working definition for poetry that they use for their classes?
It is what you say it is.
I like that. That'll work.
That's what poets do, is one I've read.
Oh, okay. That'll work too.
How about heightened language?
Heightened language, yes, most definitely. Yeah, that is really a good question. I'm going to think about that because, someone might ask me that again.
Apparently, it hasn't been an obstacle to not having a definition. Sometimes people put a whole lot of emphasis on defining terms and creating categories, and did the categories exist first, or did something happen that just came and then after it existed, people decided to make distinctions and make categories out of it?
Yeah, well, I think because I started writing before I started studying poetry, and I remember, I just told the story recently, I was writing these little poems in elementary school, and one of my teachers, I think my 5th grade teacher, at the end of the school year, I had this little blue notebook, and I was having all my fellow students sign it, and then she wrote this rhyming poem. I don't remember it, but it said something about, ba 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 ba, and you are a poet. Not don't you know it, but but I remember seeing the power, like the power of the words on that page, and seeing that, and it really stuck with me, and it's just like, oh, wow, I can write, and someone else can write, and it can just have an effect on you, and I think that was something that definitely inspired me and made me think about writing, and teaching too.
Well, do we have any more questions? Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank you so much.
Thanks again to Maw, and I would like to ask her to tell us what she's doing next that you can keep watch for.
Well, I'm glad you asked. I have a couple things coming up, and I'm really excited about this. So I helped, my friend Di Mudra found a nonprofit called Jiving International, and we're going to have a fundraiser, and it's going to be at the San Francisco Buddhist Center on November 7th. And I have 3 writers, Audrey Esquivel, Canyon Sam, who's amazing, and Shanti Sekaran, who's also at the Grotto, and Jim Santiowen, who's going to be performing music, and we're going to have a Bhangra dance and also a Bollywood dance troupe play.
Wow.
And it's going to be really incredible. So I have lots of these cards and beautiful posters. So please, we have tons and tons. I'm writing the press release right now, and I'm trying to get a lot of people to come to it. And I've done this for the last 3 years, and if you can't tell, I enjoy hosting events. So this is a big one coming up. And I'll be reading for Litquake, or Lit Crawl next Saturday for a really wonderful reading series called Hazel. And
Where's that?
Rubies in the Mission. I don't know the address. But, so that'll be next Saturday. And then Lyrics and Dirges, which is a really wonderful reading series in Berkeley at Pegasus Bookstore, is having a reading on the 19th, and I'll be reading with a lot of wonderful poets.
And at the 21st.
Oh, the 21st, thank you, the 21st. And I just want to say really quickly that one of the wonderful things about the Bay Area is the fact that we do have so many writers and so many reading series and things happening, and so I'm glad I moved up here.
We are too.
Yeah.
Ah, thank you, Tim.
Do you have an anthology coming?
Oh my gosh! What's that? Always forget to talk about that. Thank you, Tim. Okay, the biggest news of all, which I keep forgetting to talk about. Okay, so can I talk a little bit more?
Sure.
Okay, so I remember when I was in school, and I met Tim in San Pedro, and I did a reading for his reading series many, many years ago. The anthology that we all had to buy for school was Poetry Loves Poetry, edited by Bill Moore. He was the only editor at the time.
Yeah.
And I just remember being like 18, 19 years old and looking through it, just going, oh, I wonder if I'll ever be in an anthology. You know, kind of the daydreaming, poet's daydreaming. And then, then we just all had that book. So many, many, many years later, Tim got in touch with Bill for, I think at a reading, right, Tim? And
The first annual Long Beach Poetry Festival.
oh, that's right. And so 30 years later, he's doing another anthology of writers who lived in Southern California and moved up here, or vice versa. And so Tim and I are both in it, and it's coming out really soon, and we're really excited about it. A lot of incredible poets, and I don't know when the publication. We haven't really gotten to that. Neely Cherkovsky is the other editor, and it's going to be called Crossstrokes, and it's an anthology of Bay Area and Los Angeles writers.
Great.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Glenn.
Well done, Glenn.
And I